President, I will now call to order the March 28, 2019 meeting of the Department Board of Directors. The directors have received the agenda materials in advance of this meeting and are free to ask questions on the action items submitted for approval today. Please note, however, questions or comments from the audience will not be entertained at this meeting. As a reminder to the directors and as information to the public, this meeting is based on the recommendation of the Governance Committee. The trustees decided to approve a number of board action items through a consent agenda process in which the directors would approve the board resolution in one motion and vote without a summary of each agenda item from the trust president. Generally, those items are for contracts of a smaller dollar amount than and that are more operational in nature. Contract amendments do not involve an increase of more board authorization amount, and routine board items such as approval of minutes from last board meeting. The Governance Committee also recommends that, with regard to the corporate actions, the trust president provide a very short summary of each agenda item. In this way, the directors should have more time for discussion on other matters related to the work. Therefore, all board memos and resolutions on today's agenda have been posted on the trust website and are thus available to the public. Do any directors wish to comment on or recuse themselves voting on the agenda? If not, I will call for a motion to approve all the resolutions for the agenda items listed on the consent agenda, which are also on that screen. Do I have a motion? Thank you. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion carried.
That was crazy.
This is working. Well done, everybody.
Now
Okay.
I'm going to have surgery on her.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what? We went right to K, and I thought, oh my God, I'm missing pages here. But okay, I have to get used to this.
All right. As the motion is approved, all resolutions for the agenda items listed on the Board of Directors consent agenda are hereby adopted. The next item is a request for authorization to enter into a contract with Conway Marine Construction Inc. for Pier 66A structural restoration. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The trust requires the services of an experienced marine construction contractor to complete necessary structural restoration work at Pier 66A. Pier 66A is a historic structure that serves both as a public open space and berthing for two historic vessels, the Frying Pan and the John J. Harding. In 2017, an underwater inspection by the Trust Consulting Engineers revealed that the eastern timber piles, crib foundation, and finger pier components now need to be repaired and stabilized. In compliance with the Trust procurement guidelines, the Trust received 7 bids with prices ranging from just over $695,000 to as high as $4.2 million. The selection committee comprised of Trust staff and the project's construction manager evaluated the lower bid, Conway Marine Construction, and found that the bid was responsive, and Conway also satisfied the Trust responsibility determination review, subject only to completion of the company's financial capacity. New York State granted a waiver of MWB goals prior to commencement of the procurement process, and the Trust also issued a waiver of the SDVOB goals. Funding for this contract is available from New York State and the Trust capital maintenance budget. The Trust requests board authorization to enter into a contract with Conway Marine Construction for Pier 66A structural restoration for a 1-year term in the amount of $695,023 plus a 20% contingency for a total board authorization amount of up to $834,027.60.
Thank you.
One question, Madam.
Yes.
I looked at these 7 bids. Would we, and I'm not sure, would all of these companies be considered qualified for this work?
Yes.
Any other questions? Do I have a vote or a motion for a vote?
Go get that griddle.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next item before the board is a request for authorization to contract with Simpson and Brown Inc. for Piers 98 to 99 waterfront structures. Ms. Wells.
Thank you. The Trust requires the services of an experienced marine construction contractor to complete complete a modest new open water pedestrian platform between Piers 98 and 99 to improve pedestrian circulation and safety between West 57th and West 58th Streets. In compliance with the trust procurement guidelines, the trust received 9 bids with pricing range from $2.1 million to $4.3 million. A selection committee of trust staff and the construction manager evaluated the lowest bidder, Simpson and Brown, and found since Simpson both was responsive and satisfied the trust's responsibility determination requirements. New York State granted a waiver of MWBE goals prior to commencement of the procurement process. A waiver was also issued for SDVOB goals. Funding for this contract is available from the sale of development rights. The trust requests board authorization to enter into a contract with Simpson and Brown, Piers 98 to 99 waterfront structures for a 1-year term in the amount of $2,131,000 plus a 10% contingency for a total board authorization of up to $2,344,100.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Question, what is the total cost? This structure?
Do we have an estimate, Kevin, for the site utilities and the railing and lighting, the estimate?
Fit out as part of the concept fund, not the current depth, but the concept is.
But we had an estimate for it, or do you have a way of accessing this?
We can provide a number based on other S1
Right.
tasks, may or may not know. Historic numbers.
So our general par simple finishes is about 180
Yeah,
a square foot.
$40 a square.
Do we know what the size of this platform is?
20 feet by 191 feet.
Somebody do the math with this. So what is that, a little short of 600,000? Am I doing this right?
The other question?
So the other question is that this is not going to be usable until something is arranged with sanitation, and getting sanitation to do something. So it may be years before this will be open and the access.
But isn't our long-term goal to have it open?
Yes, the long-term goal. So it's very narrow there, and it is very difficult to access it. You will access it people do walk that way and will walk that way to Pier 97. It does provide some additional space, for people to stand and look over the railing or whatever they might do, or whatever the concept might be that is attached to Pier 97 design. We have had conversations years ago with sanitation regarding this. Understand the challenges of their wanting to use it for access and our wanting to use it for north-south access. We could be wrong, but we think if we show that we're actually expanding the way we've told sanitation we are going to do that and expanding the esplanade there, that we have a greater hope of getting access to that, especially when Pier 97 is underway and that we're showing that we're actually building it. We could be wrong on that, but we think we have a better chance of that. The key,
To be clear, the access will stop at Pier 98.
yes, and we are also in talks with Con Ed on the feasibility study of looking into what it would cost to move their equipment back 20 feet. So those conversations are actually happening. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we've been talking to Con Ed.
They're
Feasibility
not,
study is doable.
they're not
They're
totally opposed to it.
Yeah.
Douglas, you're just saying, why spend the money now?
That was what I was-
Why spend today what you could spend tomorrow kind of
Why-
project, or?
Why spend when there are some needs are $2.1 million? I spend it here when it may not be usable for some years. Just to give you a quick story, we acquired the site across the street. We went to Con Edison and said, we take all your equipment out of the historic building, put it on 20% of our site, and have this beautiful building. Spent 2 years negotiating with them, came up with a wonderful design for a new plant, and 2 years said, no, our boilers from 1925 are efficient today, so it doesn't make any sense. Afraid we spent 2 years negotiating on it. Maybe you have better luck.
Well, that's certainly a pertinent story. I think the question is, and part of the question is, and certainly, the board should determine what they want to do about this. We have a bid to start the work. We have a permit from DC to do the work. We are trying to get what we already have in the base plan of Hudson River Park Trust, the base plan for the permits that were issued to us a long time ago. We're trying to get that work completed as per the original plan, which this is part of. We have an extension on both our DEC and Army Corps permits for a period of a few years to get this done. Once that elapses, we would have to go back and, if we don't move forward, we certainly could move forward next year. We're actually have this contract now so that we could begin in June-ish to do the work. It takes a couple of months, as you well know, to get the contract done, get the documents, the shop drawings done by the contractor. So this work wouldn't start till June or July anyway. So if we want to skip this year, we could do that and try to get some agreements. And I think this was a discussion with the community board. This was on a list of projects for the air rights that did go to the chair of the Department of City Planning when we went through the look for Block 675 of how we were spending the money. So, we could say we're still spending it and we'll just wait. Or we could determine that, pardon me?
Is it our intention to immediately finish the structure?
No,
So
so we have the contract is for the piles and the deck.
I understand that, but so that I would, if we're just going to build it out over the water and not access, I don't think that makes any sense. We're going to actually finish it so we use it. Said closer to the water. I think that.
Well, the funds to actually finish it are in the state funds that are with Pier 97. So that was going to be finished with that whole stretch.
So we are intending.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry.
And maybe this, I've always thought, my spiritual home is the sea. And I always thought Clinton really gets the shaft in terms of waterfront, Esplanade. You can't walk through passenger ship terminals, which I think is ridiculous. And instead are in this horrible, shunted thing with chain link fence between the Intrepid and Clinton Cove Park. So I think everything that counts. Guys, I went to see mouse.
Any other questions or comments?
What's our timeline for getting it open? Do you have one?
Well, we're hoping to go into construction on the 97 project, which this is part of it, 2020. So, I mean, it will take a year and a half or so. Kevin?
To answer the original question, using historic prices of Esplanade, in today's dollars, it would be about $200 a square feet, which is equivalent to about $800,000 round. That is using historic designs. We don't know the current cost.
Historic or current, though? I mean,
Yeah,
today,
that's today's.
what we're spending today.
The intent is to build out the platform to have it ready just in time for build out the Pier 97, top side of that. Top side of this new platform would all be done under one contract. Proposing to build this marine platform so that it's ready to build out all of Pier 97 and this deck.
Anybody else? Are we ready for a motion to approve this? Any other questions? Anybody? Thank you. Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see. The next item before the board is a request for the authorization to recommend the lease with Con Edison for Pier 98 as well.
Related to the construction of the pedestrian platform between 98 and 99, the trust needs approximately 2,116 square feet of the water portion of the Con Ed lease premises located immediately adjacent to the bulkhead and to the north of Pier 98. It's a small sliver of water area. It's about 0.81.2% of the Con Ed leased premises. The trust therefore needs to amend its existing lease with Con Ed and is negotiated by trust staff and staff at Con Ed. Con Ed's rent that is currently over $1 million annually would be reduced each year by $14,072.40 to reflect the negligible fair market value of the portion of the premises, and its payments in lieu of real estate taxes would be reduced by 0.812% each year, which would be about $5,500. The proposed lease amendment was emailed to all directors as included in the board packets. Pardon me. Con Edison will need to seek approval by the Public Service Commission of the lease amendment. The trust therefore requests board authorization to execute Amendment Number 1 of the lease agreement between Hudson River Park Trust and Con Ed of New York for Pier 98 on the terms set forth in the board memo.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
So, do you need this area in order to build that?
Yes.
So, you have to wait to contract water?
They'll give us a notice to proceed. They've offered to allow us to build this before they get permission from the Public Service Commission.
Other questions?
I said any questions?
We're gonna get a license, they're gonna give us a license permit to do the work.
Are you ready for a motion to approve?
So,
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next item before the board is a request for authorization to contract with Hunter Roberts Construction for 40 restoration. Ms. Wells.
Thank you. At its March 29th, 2018 meeting, the board approved the trust entering into contract with Skanska USA for construction management services related to overseeing power repairs at Pier 40. Phases 1 and 2 is scheduled for completion in May 2019 and has been overseen by Skanska. Due to scheduling and staffing issues, the trust has determined that it is in its best interest to reassign the remaining phases 3 through 7 of pile repair work to Hunter Roberts Construction Management Group, which was the next highest ranked respondent to the RFP issued on February 2nd, 2018. 18? Okay. In accordance with the RFP, staff recommends exercising the trust right to award a contract to as many or to as few respondents as the trust may select in order to maintain the project schedule. Hunter Roberts has agreed to provide the construction management services at its original proposed price of $1,099,245 for phases 3 to 7. Hunter Roberts is also committed to meet the trust 30% under WBE and 6% SDBOB goals. Funding for this contract is currently available through the trust approved capital maintenance budget with funds provided by the sale of Pier 40 air rights. The trust is not seeking any additional monies for the construction management services from that previously by the board in March 2018. The amount, again, is slightly lower than the Skanska amount. The trust thus seeks board authorization to reallocate a portion of the previous total board authorized amount of $2,097,332 and approval to enter into a contract with Hunter Roberts for Pier 40 structural restoration construction management services in the base amount of $1,099,245 plus a 10% contingency. Sure, there are questions?
Questions? Comments?
What other projects is Skanska doing for us now?
Skanska is finishing Morton Street restoration, which will be done this summer. And they are also finishing the Pier 55 Esplanade, or Pier 54 connector, as we call it, from Bloomfield to 14th Street. And that will be done this summer as well.
Are we having any other issues with those projects scheduling?
No, it's not issues with those projects. It's manpower for Skanska. They don't have enough staff. It's been difficult to get the right amount of attention, and just think it's time to.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, the next item before the board is request for authorization to contract with the Doe Fund Inc. for park outdoor litter collection. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you. The Doe Fund is a respected not-for-profit social services organization that provides residential support services to the homeless and persons recovering from substance abuse. The trust now seeks board authorization to enter into a new 3-year contract with the Doe Fund Ready, Willing, and Able Division for outdoor maintenance services on a single-source basis. The proposed contract meets the requirements for a single-source contract under the trust procurement guidelines. The Doe Fund has performed outdoor park maintenance for the trust for over 18 years, and the trust experience with the Doe Fund supervisors and training workers has been positive. These men in blue form a part of the trust public face and are well received by park patrons. The trust is satisfied that its cost in connection with the services it receives is reasonable because the trust does not pay for-profit and overhead ordinarily associated with private maintenance firms contracting for such services. Funding for this contract will be subject to the board's annual review and approval of the trust's operating budget. The trust seeks board authorization to contract with the Doe Fund for park outdoor litter collection and related services in the amount of up to $3,798,555 for a 3-year term from April 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 2022.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Look,
Yeah, you too.
You're really nice. I can't believe it's 3 years. I feel like, right? Like yesterday, we were talking about.
I think we did just approve that contract last year.
Oh, we did.
But now
You said it was every year.
yes, it's deja vu because it really is.
It was last
Okay,
year.
now I feel better.
It was
I
last
thought it
year.
was that feeling where it's like bad month.
We're trying to do 3-year contracts instead of 1 year, so
Sorry?
we'll keep going back to you guys every year with the same
Sorry?
contract.
We're now going on 3 years contracts. We're not going to do 1 year for organizations and contracts that we believe can sustain longer than a year. And by the way, we always have a chance to terminate them. We can terminate a 3-year contract in 30 days, so if you want to.
So yeah, no,
No risk,
Yeah.
less talk, less chatter.
Anybody else? Do I have a motion to approve the Delphi contract?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Moving right along. The next item before the board is request for authorization to amend the contract with Deborah Bradley Construction Management Services, Inc. for park-wide paved and play service, fire hydrant infrastructure restoration. Ms. Wells.
Thank you. At its September 26, 2018 meeting, the board authorized the trust to enter into a contract with Deborah Bradley Construction Management Services for pavement, play surface, and fire hydrant infrastructure capital repair or replacement work required at the Pier 25 playground, Pier 45 hex paver areas, Pier 51 playground, and at Pier 84. In the course of construction work at Pier 84, the trust uncovered additional drainage issues as well as more significant pavement damage caused by intensive use. Consequently, the trust must amend the scope of work for the contract to require the installation of a new 7-inch reinforced concrete sub-base slab under the unit pavement in the area where vehicles drive onto Pier 84. This requires additional funding of $660,000. Funding for this amendment will come from the trust capital maintenance budget, but provided by New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson. The trust requests board authorization to amend the contract with Deborah Bradley Construction Management Services for park-wide paved play surface and fire hydrant infrastructure restoration work in an amendment up to $660,000 for a total board authorization amount of $5,017,210.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Can we meet Deborah Bradley one day? Because her name comes up.
Actually,
Any other name?
You'd like her.
No,
You'd like her. I mean, she's doing a lot of work, but we have
must
hired
be great.
we have hired some new contractors recently. You passed last board meeting, Stephen Dubner, which is a new contractor for us on Pier 26, Kelco, who's doing Morton Street. So I know it sounds like she has a lot, but
She's a great contract.
yes,
Always a great resource.
and she's at WBE.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the,
So moved.
thank you. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Yay, Deborah. All right, the next item before the board is request for authorization to amend contract with Adjusters International Inc. Project Closeout Contracting Service. Ms. Wells.
Thank you. In May 2015, the trust approved a sole source contractor with Adjusters International completing FEMA applications and supporting documentation for reimbursement of expenses incurred as a result of Hurricane Sandy. The board has authorized increases in the contract amount and term extensions such that the current contract authorizes up to $371,000 and expires on March 31st, 2019. In order to complete FEMA and GOSER closeout process, the trust seeks additional funding up to $25,000 and extension of the contract term for 9 months as a sole source contract. That Adjusters is familiar with the project. Worksheets on file with FEMA and GOSER. Their hourly rates are reasonable, and they continue to perform the services in a satisfactory manner. The trust expects most of the cost of the contract to be reimbursed by FEMA or GOSER, that's the state, and the balance will come from the trust capital maintenance budget. The trust seeks board approval to amend the contract with Adjusters for a total board authorization amount of up to $396,000.
Thank you. Questions?
Clatter.
All right.
Touching it, like, yeah, hot mic.
What you said.
Have a question?
Muttering.
You have a question, Mary?
No.
Okay, anybody else? Comments? Do I have a motion to approve the contract?
So I like it. It's a new way to
Get people's
communicate
attention?
here. I think it's a whole new means of
Are we supposed to
communication.
read into that noise?
Well, it's gonna be a double click, real quick. We'll know.
Morse code.
Morse code.
So moved.
Thank you.
On
Second,
FEMA.
item on the agenda is a request for authorization to second collaboration agreement.
Thank you. The proposed second collaboration agreement between the Trust and Hudson River Park Friends to renew the public-private partnership has been distributed to all directors. Key items are as follows. The initial term would be for 3 years, with both parties able to renew for up to 3 additional 2-year terms. Sorry about that. The Joint Steering Committee would continue to meet to address the strategic plan developed by the two organizations. All funds raised by Friends would be used to support the park, as well as Friends' reasonable operating costs. To the extent feasible, the Trust will name Friends as additional insured on its commercial general liability, which can be done without any additional cost to the Trust this coming year. Trust staff thus seeks board approval to enter into the second collaboration agreement with Friends.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the contract with Friends? Second. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. And the next item for the board is request approval the April 1st, 2020 fiscal year operating budget as well.
Thank you. The budget has been shared with all the directors and members of the audit committee met to review yesterday. I'll now turn it over to Dan Kurtz and Sikander Zuberi, and John will be speaking for these.
Good afternoon. As Madeline said, we're joined today by Andrew Zuberi, our Vice President of Finance, who is Madeline putting together the budget packet. I have to give you the preliminaries with regard to the public authorities law and process that followed. So by way of background, the proposed budget was reviewed in preliminary form at a joint meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee in January of this year. Copy was provided to the full board at its January 31st meeting, after which the preliminary budget was placed on the Trust website and physically posted in the lobby of Pier 40 and at other locations around the park. A companion document, the annual financing plan, which describes the completion of the park, was put on the website at the beginning of February. The capital cost by project, which appears on the last page of today's budget, contains updates from the information in the financing plan and identifies estimated amounts projected to be spent in FY20, together with funding sources for the capital work to be undertaken in the park this year. The final proposed budget, which is largely the same as the preliminary budget, was provided to the committee last week and the full board on Monday of this week. It was reviewed by the committee on Tuesday with slight revisions, then distributed to the full board yesterday. We will have a report from the committee, John, representing the committee, I guess, at the end of my presentation, which I'll try to make brief. Also, by way of clarification, the budget provides the spending framework for HRPT in the coming fiscal year. However, all new contracts in excess of $200,000, all contract amendments in excess of previously authorized amounts, and all multi-year contracts are submitted to the board individually for their approval. A number of contracts have been previously approved prior to the beginning of the anticipated this coming fiscal year, and spending authorized by the board. So with regard to the budget, for the proposed other than personnel services section of the budget, OTBS, it's in the budget at $13.2 million. Contracts for $2.5 million have already been approved by the board. For the proposed capital maintenance budget of $29.2 million, $22.5 million has already been approved by the board. For the proposed new construction budget of $45 million, $30 million has been approved by the board, the largest piece being Pier 26. This is all logical because obviously it takes some time to do contractor selection, to have contracts prepared to bring into the board, in order to tee it up, for the work. So what's before you in the budget is the amount that's anticipated to be spent during the fiscal year. A printed copy of the budget is before you, and I'm going to flip through it, so if everybody could just pull out your packet and go to page 3. I think that's sort of the easiest page to use. It's a summary page. In the other pages, you can flip, more detail and further. And Mr. Zaveri is here with his laptop, so if you have individual questions about any individual item, we gladly respond to them. You'll see on that page we have projected actual results from FY19 included in the budget document, so you can see the comparisons. And you should know that there will be final audited results for the FY19 budget year, which will be available, prepared by our outside audit firm and provided to the board in June. Also, in your packet elsewhere, as we do with every meeting, there's a budget versus actuals comparison. So this is the first 11 months of the FY19 year, and a statement of financial position, which is largely equivalent of the balance sheet. So if I can I'll just briefly going to go through the budget and again answer questions. So on revenue, we've budgeted total revenue of $33.3 million, which is a decrease of 7% from the prior year. This decrease is primarily attributable to the fact that we had a non-recurring $7 million lump sum payment from the Pier 57 tenant recognized in FY 2019. Going forward into FY 20, this is partially offset by a new $1 million Pier 57 rent obligation, which is for, if you recall, earlier, I guess it was in June of this year, the board approved an amendment to the Pier 57 lease, which allows for Google to have increased footprint, and as a result, they pay an additional $1 million in rent to the trust. We're also projecting increased earnings from invested funds, although recently the interest rates have gone down somewhat. But there's further detail on the revenue shown on Exhibit 4, which is page 9 of the budget, if you want to go through items. For outflows or expenses, we're projecting $24.1 million of operating expenses, which is up 8%. We're projecting $29.2 million of capital maintenance costs, which is down 25% from the previous budget amount. This is primarily due to the fact that our most expensive capital maintenance project, the Morton Street bulkhead reconstruction, is now almost done, and we received more favorable bid results than expected for the current year's Pier 40 pile repairs. So I think this was the previous board meeting approved contracts with Conway for two phases of the work, and they came in very favorable for us. The $45 million new construction budget is up 45% from the budget amount for the prior year, and this reflects, largely the directive to, finish the park within 5 years. On some individual items for payroll, we're budgeting an increase of 12%, which is comprised of an 8% increase in headcount from 77 people to 83 people. Merit pay increases not yet awarded, the reserve for that. I should say we're still in the process of expanding our design and construction department to handle the increase of anticipated new construction work and to complete capital maintenance work in the coming year. So some of these new positions are focused again on the design and planning department. Details of the personnel services budgets found on Exhibit 5, page 11 in your packet. For other than personnel services, ODPS, we're budgeting $1.2 million increase in insurance, most of which is liability insurance. This has also been reviewed by the committee. Tom, who's sort of our insurance expert, worked with us during the month of January and February when we were reviewing the results of the brokers' activity to try to get us favorable rates. I would say that notwithstanding the brokers' efforts, costs went up substantially, largely for reasons outside of our control. But I should say that these amounts are reimbursable by the city and the state. Other items, I'll just touch on very briefly. There's an expected $200,000 increase in janitorial and sanitation services. That largely affects the increase of minimum wage to $15, which became effective in January. Legal costs are budgeted to decrease by almost $400,000 as our in-house staff has assumed greater responsibility under the leadership of Chris Fazio, our general counsel. Other miscellaneous OTBS costs are detailed on Exhibit 6, page 13 of your packet, and include increases for money allocated for document and archive management at the trust, behind on that. On an operating basis, before consideration of capital maintenance, we're projecting a surplus of approximately $9.1 million in FY 2020. However, for capital maintenance, we have total costs of $29 million. We've been fortunate to get associated reimbursement revenue budgeted at $24 million. Therefore, the net operating surplus after capital maintenance, and I should say also after capital equipment expenditures, is projected at $2.3 million, an amount that will be directed to unfunded capital maintenance in the ensuing years. Capital maintenance costs for the current year are summarized on Exhibit 7, page 15 of your packet. The headline number remains the Pier 40 Hollow work, but that amount is fully funded from restricted funds that we received as part of the air rights transaction from St. John's. I should note also that we anticipate receiving between now and May of this year, Madeline, an increase in restricted funds of approximately $51 million from the sale of air rights to two developers, La Lazarian and Douglaston, on Block 675 in Manhattan. These funds, however, are fully committed to new capital construction and capital maintenance in community work. The last page of the budget, on page 26, has the new construction projects that I mentioned at the beginning. Again, our ability to do these new construction projects depends on staffing up largely. Also, we should say that in terms of sources of funds, state budget and the city budget need to be finalized and approved, so some of the amounts that are indicated there are provisional, although expected. And I guess I'll turn to John for a report from the committee.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. The committee met in January initially to review the 2020 budget material, and then we reviewed the final budget just last week. The 2019 projections indicate that we beat plans substantially. This is in part due to 2019 expenses coming in below plan and certain capital improvement projects being pushed back to later years, mainly 2020. Echoing some of the highlights noted by Dan, 2020 revenue is projected to be lower than 2019, primarily as a result of one-time payment from Pier 57. Expenses are projected to be higher, as Dan noted, and some of the key places that expenses are running above 2019 for payroll, insurance, as we just talked about, security, and short-term repairs for Pier 40 that we're going to have to deal with in the coming years, as waiting for the long-term strategic solution there. The committee members present recommend the 2020 budget be approved and thank Dan and Sikander and team for all their hard work. And with that, I would move to approve the April 1, 2019 to March 31st, 2020 fiscal year operating budget.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Hearing none, do I have a second?
Wait, John, did the committee have any suggestions for management in terms of operation?
This is now my, I guess my third year serving on the committee, and management has proven to be very careful and conservative in their projections. Each of the years, they've beat the projections, both on revenue and expense. So I think that the committee, recognizes that and really has a lot of confidence in work that's done. We did sit this year in well over 2 hours of meetings and had a very sufficient period of time to review these budgets. Again, it was from January. The material that we originally presented in January had very little change in the ensuing 2 months. So I think that we, I don't think there was any flags or any issues or concern with the process management's command of the information and the operations.
I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you
very
again.
much. Okay, so that concludes board action items for today. And I'd like to.
And thank you to John and the audit committee, and thank you to Sikander and Dan and everyone else who participated in the budget this So I wholly expect and request that this be a little bit more iterative in the presence report, and that there be take the time to discuss further any information in here or something that's missing or anything else that you would like to discuss since we have our new and improved consent that worked well today in potentially our longest of actual contracts. I'll start with something that Dan touched on, which is the general liability insurance policies. They get renewed on February 28th annually, and it always is a last-minute push. You know, given the anomaly of being a park and having not have the city or state self-insuring us, you put that together with the terrorist attack that suffered on the bikeway in 2017, it's increasingly difficult to acquire insurance in a timely manner. This year, the liability insurance increased by almost $1.3 million. For the trust, $100 million in commercial general liability and excess umbrella policies. Specifically, premium costs and applicable fees in 2018 were over $1.9 million, and the premium costs and applicable fees is approximately $3.2 million more this year, or $3.2 million this year, almost $1.3 million in addition. We also pay an additional fee to the Office of General Services for its services in obtaining insurance coverage and administering plans during the year. But given the high premium, Director, sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my throat right now. Pagase was helpful in working with us to get OGS to reduce its fee from 7.5% to 5%. And speaking to OGS and OGS's broker, we understand a tremendous effort was made to procure a cost-effective insurance group of policies, particularly since there were no claims filed to the current CGL carrier Collins this year. We also understand that carriers typically review the last 3 years, and although the trust has had no claims against it in 2018, there were approximately 45 claims filed to Star Insurance, including all claims related to the Halloween terrorist attack against both the trust and New York City in 2017. As a reminder, the terrorist attack actually took place on state DOT property. As a result, most carriers declined to provide a quote to the trust's insurance in 2019, and the broker reached out to 36 carriers, and 31 declined to provide a quote. Factors for such denial included the high risks that I mentioned, but also that we're a New York City venue, the trust's involvement with construction work, concerns with future terrorism, general operations of a park and its use by millions of people, an unusual process, again, to ensure a public park. Another issue was AIG's company-wide decision to exit the lead umbrella market. AIG was unique in that they were able to provide a limit of $25 million as a single placement in 2018 at a premium of $450,000. For 2019, we needed multiple carriers who now provide coverage for the $25 million excess, and the premium came over $1.15 million. A summary of the insurance providers and costs is provided in your board packets. New York State's responsibility for the increase is over $832,000 based on the fact that the state covers 65% of the insurance premium and other costs. Funding for the insurance will be provided under the Environmental Protection Fund as in the last couple of years, but the additional $832,000 will also come out of the EPF funds which were earmarked for capital maintenance projects. New York City pays 35% of the insurance cost through offsets under the PEP contract. So technically, that $832,000 will now come out of our capital reserves. Are there any questions, comments? Next year, we're going to look to reduce the insurance coverage to 10 months so we can have a year-end date of December 31st. That will give me a little extra time to work with the state, particularly in acquiring additional EPF funds if we know that we're going to have another increase similar to this one. I'm not saying we won't necessarily get it, but we will at least have time. I had no time this year to actually go back and really try to advocate for more money. So we're going to try to adjust that until we can talk the state and the city into self-insuring us. Questions? Tom?
The broker did a great job. I mean, this is a complex risk. Like Madeline said, most people self-insure parks of this size. So reaching out to 30-plus insurance companies, it was a very difficult situation. And unfortunately, we just sort of have to just deal with it until we can look at, self-insurance options. The state making choices.
I agree with it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not
I'll try to keep,
got any good topics?
yes, I'm not sure, but I'll let you know. Construction is always a good topic. As we did not have a quorum to approve a new contract with New York City Parks today for security, let me just give you a brief overview, which means that no one at this meeting needs to be accused. The Trust's current contract with City Parks for PEP services expires on March 31st, 2019. The Trust and City Parks intend to enter into a new contract for a one-year term commencing April 1st, 2019, with the Trust having the right to renew 2 additional terms. Thus, at the May board meeting, the Trust will seek ratification and approval for an up to 3-year term for PEP security services. The services provided will be similar to the current contract, and the Trust will be seeking additional PEP officers to address the growth in the park and traffic, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation management. The Trust thus expects to seek board ratification of a 3-year contract with City Parks at the next meeting in May for a contract amount for 3 years for just over $10,000. Any questions? Okay. Let me now address the current status of the Pier 40 legislation effort. I previously sent you a copy of the March 19, 2019 letter to Community Board 2 signed by U.S. Representative Nadler, Assemblymember Glick, Senators Hoylman and Kavanaugh, Manhattan Borough President Brewer, and City Council Speaker Johnson, asking the Community Board to consider a number of questions regarding the development of Pier 40 that will inform their consideration of any amendment to the Hudson River Park Act this year. The letter seeks Community Board 2's opinions on any recommended height limits for the Pier 40 building, the recommended lease term for Pier 40 development, limits on square footage for commercial office use at Pier 40, and minimum amount of park space that would be mandated in any redevelopment scenario. As many of you know, staff members from our elected officials have been weekly for the last 4 months, working hard to come up with ideas for parameters for state legislation. Beyond the legislative limits on future development at Pier 40, there would also clearly be additional requirements in the RFP and environmental review processes and ULUR So the electeds' efforts have focused on the specific issues they believe could be appropriate to limit in legislation. In consultation with board members, with development and financial expertise, staff from the trust has provided detailed information on potential development costs, trust financial assumptions for the future, and engineering on Pier 40 and construction assumptions in response to particular questions that we've received. The trust financial projections continue to assume that Pier 40 should contribute 25% of park's operating expenses in the future. As a reminder, there was a time when Pier 40's operations paid for a much larger percentage of park operations, but the cost of maintaining Pier 40 and our success in securing other revenue from other park locations has reduced Pier 40's share significantly over the last decade. HRPT staff has tried to explain to the elected officials and community that there are many, many assumptions that are involved in projecting development costs and rental scenarios for any future redevelopment, and that therefore we believe there is need for some flexibility in the legislation and eventual RFP. Pier 40 will be a difficult and expensive project with a lot of public amenities, and we believe that for any future development to have a chance of success, it will need a substantial amount of the building to be programmed with commercial uses, specifically office. On the other hand, we also understand the public cares greatly about the park as we do, the pier and community, and therefore that some limits will be required. Last night, Community Board 2 hosted a Pier 40 for All task force meeting, which was attended by about 150 to 200 people, including Directors Durst and Frederick, and a large contingent of children participating in youth sports at Pier 40. Most spoke of the value of Hudson River Park and their desire for improved and expanded open space, and specifically and especially ball fields, though there were also speakers supporting their direction provided in the elected's letter to the community board, as well as voting. After the public comments, 6 members of Community Board 2 went into executive session as the Pier 40 for All task force. Dan, Noreen, and I answered questions, most of which were not directly based on the questions posed in the letter. After discussion, the group determined that they would convene possibly on April 15th to consider a draft resolution that could be recommended to the full community board. Any questions, comments, statements? Please.
I got it all last night.
Director Durst, do you have a comment?
I have considerable concern about the feasibility of any cap here and fear of another failed park. The only thing I can think of is trust to be doing its own exploratory. You're informed as conditions were going not be surrounded. Yes.
Yes, it's a very good point, and we will be doing that, and we will be continuing to have our discussions in our little working group. Yes. Thank you.
I don't know what to say about last night, but I guess I thought the elected officials reps seemed focused on task management. Maybe the whole, yeah.
They've been spending a lot of time and working very hard and asking very good
Is
questions.
that Deborah's rep?
Pardon me?
Is that Deborah's rep? Is
Who?
it David?
That's Charles. David is Brentwood.
Oh, okay. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, they did seem to be doing their homework in a united front.
Okay, well,
What are we
yes?
anticipating, if we are anticipating, new legislation.
Well, it has to be done before the June session is over.
So what is our timetable working back?
Working backwards, the community board will be, I think, writing a resolution in April. That's the information that was said last night. And then the elected officials will determine what they want to do moving forward to get to that June date. Okay. I'll now provide an update on the status of design and construction at certain piers within the park. First, Pier 26 construction is proceeding on schedule. TrevCon Construction installed prefabricated panels that will support the Pier 26 ecological deck get down. Fortunately, it's high tide over there. They did this during the evenings of March 19th to 22nd. They'll be constructing the remainder of the platform and waterfront structures later this spring, and they are anticipated to complete their work this June. Stephen Dubner Landscaping will begin construction of the park finishes, including landscaping, paving, wood decking, and the site furnishings next week. Yes, I got a nod on that one. Pier 26 is slated to open in early fall 2020. Any questions, comments? We have our oyster biohuts already into the river. So they're already
Airbnb.
growing. Pardon me? The Airbnb,
Voice
yes.
of sea life.
They're not paying any rate. With regard to the design for the Gansevoort Peninsula, James Corner Field Operations has begun site analysis, survey, and data collection. The Trust Field Operations held 2 successful public engagement sessions on March 6th and 26th. There was strong community support for a beach, natural habitat, passive recreation, and sports fields. With this information in hand, the field operations team is beginning the development of conceptual design in close coordination with the Trust. We will then return to Community Board 2 with the first pass of the concept design later this spring, and I'll keep the design committee informed of development of the design. Any questions?
What's going on with the Whitney sculpture?
They are still in the process of pre-construction, but we do anticipate the start of that this summer.
And it won't interfere at all with
No,
construction of the beach?
No. They'll be way out of there by the time we start construction. It's not a long construction period.
So when will that be installed?
Starting this summer.
This is the progress.
And now, finally, our landscape architect for Pier 97, Melk, is proceeding with Pier 97 conceptual design in close coordination with the Trust following several working meetings with staff. We will be reviewing materials with our design committee, followed by a presentation to the community board on April 11th. I have nothing to show yet because we're just a little bit away from having something to see. So that looks very naked there. Yeah. I'll now discuss recent developments related to Pier 45 and 84 water taxi service. The Trust is working to reactivate use of the existing water taxi floats at Pier 45, which was repaired last year, and that's at Christopher Street and Pier 84 and West 44th Street to commence some level of operation later this spring. New York Water Taxi previously operated a successful hop-on, hop-off tourist-oriented water taxi service, which included the floats at Pier 45 and 84 from about 2004 to 2017. In early 2017, the company became a subsidiary of Circle Line, and service was subsequently discontinued. The 2 floating docks have been unused since. We refurbished the Pier 45 dock, and in April 2018, the Trust issued a request for proposals for 2 floats, but only New York Water Taxi responded. Since there was only a single response, the RFP was deemed to have failed under the Trust procurement guidelines. Subsequent efforts to enter into a new agreement with New York Water Taxi on a sole source basis could not be completed in time for 2018 season. Discussions have now advanced regarding a new proposed service that would allow New York Water Taxi to use the floats primarily for the purpose of picking up and dropping off passengers for its all-day access pass. The Trust has been discussing a 2-year agreement with New York Water Taxi to operate water taxi vessels with capacity not to exceed 99 passengers, the same size as what operated at the 2 piers historically. Importantly, both the piers 45 and 84 floats will remain public facilities, and the prospective permit with New York Water Taxi will be non-exclusive. The Trust may grant permission and issue permits to other users and operators to use the water taxi landings, as was the case for the original permits. Regardless of usage, no parking or taxi drop-off will be provided at these locations. Questions? Okay. We also understand that Citigroup intends to begin service of its water taxi at Pier 25th on April 1, which service will be limited to transporting city employees between its Jersey City and Manhattan offices. We received test data that confirms new engines on water taxi most stringent EPA Tier 3 emission standard for marine vessels. Citigroup is further committed to conduct annual testing of the engines to the engines are continuing to EPS best available technology standard. Thoughts or questions? And finally, in your board packets for today's meeting, you'll find a statement regarding all contracts since the last board meeting between $100,000 and $200,000, a memo providing an update on the status of FEMA reimbursements. They still owe us approximately $11 to $12 million, and the financials for the last 11 months of fiscal year 2018-19. And any questions about that? Okay, and lastly, we were just informed that Henry Sturm, former New York City Parks Commissioner, has passed away. Henry was an active member of our board for many, many years, including into his retirement. Henry will be remembered as one of the most colorful and strongest advocates for parks. He was dedicated to building better parks and establishing partnerships to keep them strong. And of course, if you were lucky enough to have a working relationship with Henry, you would be anointed a park name, which he would have inscribed in the book, and Henry would continue to call you by that name. My name is Carl, and I would like to offer a moment of silence to remember Commissioner Stern. Thank you.
So we have friends.
Well, we have the advisor, Daniela from the Advisory Council.
Thank you. Usually I just kind of provide a quick summary, but today is actually my last day of chair of CB2 representative of the Hudson River Park Advisory Council. And I wanted to, we actually had a pretty important meeting. It had a lot of detail in it. And I'm actually going to read it, and I kind of regret that I didn't bring my glasses, but I'm going to get through it.
Wait, this is the AC meeting.
Yes, this is the AC meeting. I'm only talking about the Hudson River Park Advisory Council. And Bob Townley will take over. So what we do is every year there's a different chair, right? So CB1, CB2, and CB4. So CB1 will take it back this year. I'd like to begin by thanking Madeline and Noreen and Diana Taylor for just creating such a beautiful park, as well as all the volunteer efforts from the rest of the board. It doesn't go unnoticed that you have tremendous passion that bestowed on in the stewardship of our world-class park, which is just finding new avenues for greatness all the time. This month's Hudson River Park Advisory Council meeting was held at Village Community School, VCS, on March 11th. We focused on 2 agenda items, which dominated the discussion, reviewed our impressions of the James Cornerfield Operations CB2 meeting, held earlier this month, and we invited staff members of elected officials to review their process to a possible vision of the Hudson Act. Changes to the Act pertaining exclusively to Pier 40, which Madeline did a great job of rounding up, and I pretty much agree with everything you said. It was very accurate. The Gonza Board discussions were dominated by representatives of youth sports leagues looking for additional field space because there isn't enough to go around to provide for all of downtown's programs. We also heard from members of the human-powered boating community who were advocating for a beach, but actually more precisely, access to the water and a boathouse. Not an elevated beach, but actually getting their feet in the water. We also heard from one guest that wanted to see Gonza Peninsula return to a natural state, which I believe represents a return to a green sanctuary. What everyone agreed upon was a design that suits the local community, given the area's high volume of tourist activity in the meatpacking district, the Whitney, which is across the street, and the eventual completion of the wonderful Pier 55, which will also attract thousands of visitors to the surrounding area. In summary, the Advisory Council wants to see Gonza designed for local uses. As a matter of coincidence, or perhaps clarity to the issue, many members of the Advisory Council convened at another local school, Morton Street School, earlier this week to participate in a design exercise for the future park. I'd like to point out that Morton Street School is unable to find space for after-school sports programs in the area because it doesn't have any nearby field space. Pier 40 is already booked by other programs. Morton Street School does have one small space indoors that they can use at Pier 40 in the winter, but everything else is booked by all the other leagues. They have J.J. Walker between November and mid-December only. Otherwise, they take a crosstown bus to East River Park, practice for an hour and come back. That's a 4-hour trip, which, as we all know, will be closing very soon for renovations. A 13U field, not a full-sized field, and not a toddler field or 10U field, I believe personally is needed at Gonza to provide recreation for the community to service not only the sports programs, but the schools in our area that have no place to play. I have a small portion of some of the letters written by the children who use HRP every day and are worried that they will be locked out of recreational programs as our community grows and our field space diminishes. Now back to Advisory Council. I'm going to leave these with you, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah. The Pier 40 conversation included both Hudson River Park Friends, presented by Connie Fishman, and shortly thereafter by a group of staff members from the representatives, really led by Matthew Washington of Gail Brewer's office and Charlie Anderson of Gail office. Connie defined Pier 40 for All as an initiative for everyone who has a passion for the park. The message, as I interpret it, was in order for the park to reach its aspirational goals, certain realities need to be supported so the trust can expand its business, receive income from Pier 40, and finish the rest of the park. The staff members of the electeds laid out the process by which they're considering changes to the Hudson River Park Act, which Madeline already summarized. And that's my report.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for all your work.
They're really wonderful.
Thank
From
you,
the
Dan.
heart, and they're all good.
Thank you.
Just checking, did the
Thank you,
advisory
Dan.
council co-host that press with Gansworth meeting?
No,
No,
they
that
just
was-
attended it.
Oh, some of your members did.
Many of the members did, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to check.
No, that was a friend's, I think it was put together.
That's what I thought.
That was us,
confused.
yes.
I knew that,
It was our charrette.
I knew that.
Thank you for your service and your continued service. Connie, Hudson River Park Friends? Any questions?
Hello. I want to thank Dan for that summary that is actually more eloquent than the speech that I delivered at the meeting. Thank you. And I'll posthumously thank Commissioner Stern for my park name Rio. And it drove him crazy that I would never wear my Rio badge, so I apologize. Friends is starting its spring initiatives now. The first will be, we're getting ready for a capital campaign to raise money for Pier 26 play area that will eventually be put next to the estuarium. We're working with trust staff to get final schedules and prices for the campaign so that we can develop our marketing and solicitation materials and start having meetings. Tuesday next week, our board will vote on the same collaboration agreement that you just approved here. I expect it to pass. I haven't heard any comments or requests for modifications from our board. we just began our volunteer gardening program yesterday with our first group in, I believe, the grassy area of the Tribeca Boardwalk. We're having a second event this Saturday with about 80 of our green team volunteers on what looks to be about a 65-degree day, so this is a good one. If any of you would like to come out and see us work, we're there probably every other Saturday during the season with the green team and several times with the corporate group. Spring membership drive begins in the second half of April and runs through the end of May. That is a combination of fundraiser and new member raiser. We are currently working on sponsorships for the Playground Committee Barbecue, which will be held at the end of May, and the Hudson River Park Games the third week of June. And we are also closing our fiscal year on March 31st, getting ready for our audit and initiating our new budget after its approval on April 2nd. And finally, we're still looking for our second gala honoree for our October gala this year. Our board member, David Chang, has accepted being our first honoree, so one down and one or two to go. And that's really it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, I think that closes all the business for our board meeting. Anybody have anything to say? Do I have a motion to adjourn? No. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, you're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.